But I welcome you on behalf of those partners and the Center for Journalism at Wits University. Carlos Cardoso was a student and an SRC member at this campus in the 1970s. A very prominent, outspoken Frelimo supporter when the revolution happened in Mozambique. He was a Mozambican who was living in South Africa. Because of his support for Frelimo, at that time, he was deported from South Africa 2 weeks before his final exams. And the university arranged for him to write his exam in Mozambique and finish his degree. Carlos became a very well-known journalist in Mozambique. He ran AIM, the Mozambican official news agency. He broke away some years later to start an independent fax newspaper, the first independent publication in independent Mozambique. Very well known throughout the region for his journalism, for his outspokenness, for his fierceness in every way. Carlos was investigating corruption in the State Bank when he was assassinated in the early 2000s. It was a terrible moment for Southern African journalism and for Mozambican journalism in particular. I'm pleased to say that some years later, his killers were caught and jailed. So because he was a graduate of this university, the Wits Center for Journalism marks his assassination every year with a lecture that is designed to show solidarity around media freedom issues across the continent. That's the purpose of this lecture, to highlight and support and encourage solidarity across the continent around media freedom issues. Tonight's focus, well, I'll hand over to Angela Quintal, who's going to chair the session tonight, and who will talk about tonight's events and introduce tonight's speakers. Thank you very much.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for being here. It's great to see everyone in person. I think for the past 2 years we've been looking at each other on screens, so really great to be here. And also, I think I should welcome the audience who's actually watching this on the live stream. Tomorrow is the International Day to End Impunity in crimes for crimes against journalists. So it's really good that we're here on the eve of this day, and that we're going to be talking about two journalists, because both Baba and Penny are journalists, but they're also journalists who have had to deal with the worst tragedy, and that is losing a loved one, and a loved one who was killed in the course of their work. Fellow journalists. And so today I wanted just to give you some idea of what we face as journalists the world over. Through that, okay. What we face as journalists the world over. 263, at least 263 journalists have been murdered in reprisal for their work globally in the past decade. And at least 51 of these have been in Africa. Think about that. 263 journalists, and of the vast majority of these journalists, at least 80%, their killers have walked free. No one has been held to account. And that, unfortunately, is what plays out here in Africa as well. The vast majority of journalists who are killed on our continent, their killers are walking free. Today, the Committee to Protect Journalists actually released its annual index, its impunity index, where we rank those countries that are actually the worst when it comes to allowing journalist killers to walk free. And unfortunately, yet again, Somalia ranks number 1, and we have South Sudan as number 3. The company that these countries are keeping includes Syria in at number 2. We've got Afghanistan at number 4 and Iraq at number 5. And what's really important, though, is if we ourselves as journalists aren't going to be in solidarity with those of our colleagues who are killed, with their families, if we're not going to be there to seek justice, then what happens when you're next? And I think it's important to hear the stories of 2 journalists who have found that, in fact, unlike Carlos Cardoso, there has been no justice yet. And so they have continued the fight to try and ensure that they will get justice. And so I'm going to hand over to Baba. Baba Hydara is the co-publisher and the managing director of The Point newspaper in the Gambia. And The Point is a famous newspaper. It's an institution, and it's an institution because of the man who started it, his father, Dada Hydara. And Dada, unfortunately, was a thorn in the side of that madman Yahya Jammeh, who did many things that I'm sure you're going to share with the audience tonight, Baba. But he was assassinated by a hit squad sent by Yahya Jammeh. And to this day, Baba is trying to ensure that the killers, and of course Yahya himself, who's now sitting in Equatorial Guinea, will actually face justice for the murder of his father. So over to you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Distinguished colleague who support the tireless and selfless work that journalists do on a daily basis. I feel quite elated to participate in this special event that remembers our late colleague, Cardoso, whose life was cut short while he was investigating corruption in his country, Mozambique. I wanted to say just a little about Carlos. I did a little research. Carlos was a man who, from his childhood days, had what it took to speak the truth, and he stood up against impunity. As a student, he was said to have been involved in activism here in South Africa, which led him being deported back to Mozambique. We are also aware of his choice to remain in Mozambique even after many of his fellow white Mozambicans had left following taking over of power by the Frelimo liberation movement. These and many more of his actions define the trajectory that Carlos took to become the press freedom hero that he is being remembered today. However, while Carlos remains an icon in the fight for press freedom in Africa, and indeed the whole world, but he was certainly not alone in the struggle. Like him, many other journalists have paid the ultimate price for standing up for the truth. For instance, barely 4 years after Carlos' assassination, my own father, Dada Hydara, was also killed by the dictatorial regime of former President Yahya Jammeh of the Gambia, following his persistent criticism of the draconian major laws that were being used by the government to intimidate and harass journalists. Despite the struggle by my dad and his compatriots against the draconian laws, it is sad to report that such bad laws still exist in our law books in the Gambia, making it very difficult for the media to operate in such a climate. I will talk about these major laws just a little. These major laws were created by Yahya Jammeh to silence the major. The laws consisted of hiking the newspaper registration fee from $100,000 to $500,000, making it impossible for most major chiefs to be able to fund their newspapers. And without that legislation, you cannot operate. So it was really working in his advantage to make sure that the major was silenced. Even though the Point newspaper, our newspaper that my dad co-founded, still continues to operate, but like many other major houses in the country, it is faced with quite a lot of financial and logistical challenges. However, in order to keep alive his legacy, I was compelled by circumstances to return to the Gambia from abroad after his assassination, not to only help run the paper, but carry on the struggle that he was engaged. After his assassination, a little bit after his assassination, I went to exile. I went to exile to Paris, and in Paris I started working with Reporters Without Border, with their West Africa desk, who was Leonard Vincent at the time. What we did, we started doing a lot of campaigns in both languages, French and English, knowing that Gambia is just next to Senegal. These campaigns were really helpful because with the campaigns we managed to achieve a lot and also expose what was happening in the Gambia, what Yahya Jammeh was doing, and that is silencing the press. So it really helped in the long run. My return to the Gambia was also followed by the founding of the Victim Center, in which, together with families of other victims of Yahya Jammeh regime, we came together to fight for justice for our family members. We subsequently created a pressure group called Jammeh to Justice, with the help of Reed Brody, who is also called the Dictator Hunter. I will talk about him a little, whose objective was to pile pressure on the Gambian authorities to do everything it takes to bring perpetrators and Jammeh himself to justice. The campaign was made of Gambian victims, Gambian and international activists. After Jammeh left the Gambia, he went for exile in Equatorial Guinea. Afterwards, I returned to the Gambia. With other victims' family, we decided to create the Victim Center. Now the Victim Center has registered all over Gambia thousands of victims, and also is supporting them financially, medical, with their medicals, and a lot of other things, psychosocial, the list goes on. So it was something that really the victims needed at the time. And later on, that same Victim Center helped even the Truth and Reconciliation and Reparation Commission that was created after Jammeh left, which was the Truth and Reconciliation and Reparation Commission, which was established by the present government back in 2017 after Jammeh was sent to exile in Equatorial Guinea. The commission tied Jammeh to my father's cold and cowardly killing, as well as to the enforced disappearance, killings, and torturing of opposition parties, journalists, shooting and killing of peaceful demonstrators, the murder of 59 West African migrants, witch hunt campaigns in which most of them were arbitrarily detained and many died as a result. It also found that Jammeh raped and sexually assaulted women brought to him after announcing that he had invented a cure for AIDS, forced HIV positive Gambians to give up their medicine and enroll in sham treatment program under his personal care. The government has accepted the TRRC recommendation to prosecute Jammeh and his accomplices and has announced that it will set up a special prosecution unit to build cases and will seek to establish hybrid court with ECOWAS to prosecute the worst crimes of the Jammeh's era. For my family, this wasn't the first trial we had against Jammeh. Currently, we're having the trial in Germany. The thing is, one of the killing squad of Jammeh went to Germany and stayed there. So after doing a lot of investigation, the Germans detained him and start studying ways of making him come to trial there in Germany. So what happened is there's something called international jurisdiction. And the Yahya Jammeh's killer was qualified to be tried in Germany because of that international jurisdiction. So one of the goals of the victim center to assist victims in their, the commission tied Jammeh to my father's cold, cowardly killing, as well as enforce, the main goals. Okay. Moreover, in my own family, quest for justice for my dad and all other victims of the Jammeh regime, we have received enormous support internationally, most recently from the German judiciary in selecting my father's case as one that qualifies for universal jurisdiction, which meant his case could be tried in Germany. Since one of the members of former President Jammeh's death squad who were accused of his murder was arrested by the German authorities while residing in Germany. The case is currently ongoing in the town of Celle in Germany. A couple of weeks ago, I gave my testimony in the court facing one of my father's alleged killers. Due to the insecurity facing journalists, even today in Africa and all over the world, many of us are still faced with life-defining choices on a daily basis, all constantly clamoring as a former US President, Thomas Jefferson, once said that if he had to choose between a government without newspapers or newspapers without a government, I should not hesitate a moment to prefer the latter. In similar quote, former South African president and liberation icon Nelson Mandela said, "A critical, independent, and investigative press is the livelihood of any democracy in this world." This shows the vitality of the media and how important is it to nurture and sustain democracy. Therefore, in order for journalists to effectively carry out their work, their safety must be safeguarded and guaranteed not only in Africa, but throughout the world. It is a naked reality that our governments in Africa in particular need to do a lot more to prioritize the enactment of new laws that would guarantee the safety of journalists both at their workplaces and homes. While there's no doubt that the Gambia has made quite a lot of positive progress since the end of the Yahya Jammeh dictatorship era in 2017, but the safety of journalists remains a challenge. In addition to financial and other constraints facing the media, Gambia journalists and their media houses, like in many other African countries, still face threats, and as a result, they are compelled to resort to self-censorship as they are constantly faced with intimidation, job insecurity, and political threats, as well as social and economic threats. As a result of this set constant threats facing Gambian journalists, the Gambia Press Union in November 2021 held a national forum on the safety of journalists. The forum brought together journalists to discuss their safety concern and the improvements that were needed to enhance the effectiveness of the media in holding government to account. Since 2019, the Gambia Press Union has made significant effort to improve the safety of journalists in preparation for the December 2021 presidential elections. The union, with the help of an international safety trainer, held training session for 12 safety trainers who in turn had been conducting safety trainings for journalists covering protests and political events. Subsequently, the Gambia Press Union managed to train 60 journalists from the print, electronic and online media on safety, security and conflict-sensitive reporting during election through funding from International Freedom of Expression Exchange effects. In conclusion, I wish to state that in the Gambia today, assaults on journalists still persist. The Gambia Press Union has registered more than 13 assaults on journalists since the new government came into power in 2017. These assaults were mainly perpetrated by politicians and their supporters from both the ruling and opposition parties, and also from the security apparatus. Unfortunately, none of these perpetrators were brought to book. Finally, we commemorate this year, tomorrow we commemorate this year's International Day to End Impunity for crimes against journalists. We call for a global action against all perpetrators who are found guilty to face the full force of the law, as crimes committed against journalists continues to be a threat of freedom of expression. I would like to extend my profound gratitude to Wits University and to the Committee to Protect Journalists, not only for choosing me as a keynote speaker, but for an icon like Carlos Cardoso, but for the ongoing support you continue to show to victims and their families. Thank you all.
Thank you, Baba. Thanks very much. Guys, we are running out of time, so one of the things I am going to do is think about some of the questions you may want to ask after the session, after you hear Penny, but we are probably going to have to keep it really short. Just to say, as a South African journalist, I knew Penny's husband, Anton, and I was actually an editor at the Mercury newspaper when we heard, and we all thought that Anton had actually been arrested, detained, and every day we'd have this yellow ribbon around the office plant, and we would have one of those little sticky notes on the window saying how many days we thought that he was being detained for. And then we had that terrible news that in fact he had been killed. And to this day, unfortunately, no one has been held to account. And as you will hear from Penny, the family is yet to receive his body, and they're still trying to seek justice. And part of that justice must come from the South African government, who has to play a role, particularly since President Ramaphosa has had a huge influence in the African Union when he was the Commission chair, and he was actually very involved in the safety mechanism. He was the one that made the speech about the safety platform for journalists and how important it was to protect journalists. And so I'm taking the opportunity, because I can say this, I'm no longer a journalist, I'm actually an activist, that I really think that it is time that the South African government steps up to the plate and assists Penny and her family to find justice for Anton. But let Penny tell you all about it herself. Over to you, Penny. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Angela. Thanks to Wits University. Thank you to the AIJC and the CPJ for hosting this and actually seeing fit to invite us, Justice for Anton campaign, to be part of this. Baba, I'm really humbled to share the space with you, I have to say, after everything you and your family have been through. And you're right, on the eve of the International Day to End Impunity for crimes against journalists, it's really poignant that we do actually spotlight these two cases in particular, which are really, really massive on this continent. Before I start, I'd like to give you a little snapshot. Angela's taken you through some of it, but I thought I would give you a little bit of more of a snapshot, a bit more detail about what happened to Anton Hammerl. I've got a video for you. The narrative is from James Foley. He was a witness to the fateful event that happened on the 5th of April. James himself is no longer with us. Some of you may recall his really horrific death at the hands of ISIS in 2014. He was the very first journalist that was beheaded publicly in the desert. So if I could have some help, and if the gentleman from tech could please press play, that would be great. You'll see a narrative from James, and you'll also see some pictures that Anton took from there, and a few other pictures from other parts of Africa. I sent it to William. Yeah. Do you want to play it with my laptop?
Yeah, please, that would be great.
How do you do it? Do you want to just connect it?
Yeah, thank you.
It's fine. So sorry. Didn't trust tech to not work when you need it.
My name is Hassan, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so just do this.
Can I just say that while we wait for this, if you are interested in reading more, here's a bit of a plug for my own organization. If you go to our website, cpj.org, and you just put in the names of both Dada Hydara or Anton Hammerl, you'll actually find a lot of information there. But you'll also have the very video that we're talking about was an interview with CPJ where James Foley spoke about what happened. Are we ready to go?
Sorry, hold on a second.
And there's
That's
also
fine,
a
let me do
Q&A
it.
with Baba's sister, Mari, where she talks about what happened the day that they heard about their father being killed.
Is that right?
And I think what I should say, it actually happened on your mom's birthday, wasn't it? And it was also on the anniversary of the Point newspaper's birthday. And they had actually left the office. There was a father with some journalists, right? And they were gunned down in the car. Well, he was gunned down in the car. So, yeah, I think those are the sort of stories that really brings it home about what it's like to be a journalist, thinking you're coming home from a party, you're celebrating, you're going to go home to your wife, your children, and you get gunned down.
I think we're ready.
You ready?
Yeah.
Cool.
My name's James Foley. I'm 38 years old. I'm a freelancer, a writer, and videographer. Last year I was captured in Libya for 44 days. And I was with Anton Hammerl when he was killed that day. I only knew Anton for 5 days. He was this kind of guy who had a light inside of him that really brought people to them. He was humble and open, and we started to work together a little bit. And that morning, it was myself, Claire Gillis, Manu Bravo, and Anton Hammerl. And we were ambushed just outside of Brega by 2 Gaddafi vehicles, probably about 10 soldiers, just like firing. He was killed immediately when we were ambushed. And it was that unforgettable, horrible feeling of not being able to help him and not being able to go back for him because we were captured. Also, the decision we had to make to not tell any Libyan authorities that we were witness to this war crime, because we all felt that that would put our own eventual freedom in jeopardy. Penny was led to believe that he was alive despite increasing evidence that something was very wrong. But right away, within the first couple of days, Penny had an idea that something was wrong. 2 weeks later, when we could all call home, and Anton didn't call home, of course, she must have known something was very wrong. She tried as much as she could to find out what was going on, and several times the regime told her, "He's alive, we know he's alive." We were ambushed, and Anton was killed April 5th, 2011. And we weren't released until May 19th. And that's when we told Penny that he was in fact killed immediately. And that was it. I mean, that was probably the hardest part.
No, that's it. Can I just take this back? No, I need the words. Thank you. So sorry. Anyhow, so you heard the narrative. I'm sorry you didn't get to see the pictures. There were some pretty good ones in there. So yeah, there you had directly from the person who was there an eyewitness account of what happened. In the years leading up to his death, James and some of the other journalists who traveled with Anton in and around Libya actually decided, after Anton was killed, that they would commit themselves to investigating what had happened. Because the problem is we did not have his body. We had the eyewitness account. We had, confirmation that he had been killed by Gaddafi soldiers, but we had no body. We had no remains. The need for our family was then, and still is now, and it remains simple. We need truth, accountability, and justice. We need to know what happened to Anton's remains and where they are. And only by those truths and facts will we be able to seek accountability of those involved in Anton's death. It shouldn't really have been up to this band of journalists traveling from country to country to take it upon themselves to do this job of investigating. And I'll come back to this later. First, I think I need to establish, certainly for a lot of our African friends and colleagues, a little bit more about the story. I think you come to this more fresh than those of us who are from here. So I'll take you back just a little further to set the scene of our personal lives, just to give you a snapshot. I met my husband Anton in this very city. Not far from here is Melville, the stomping ground for many journalists and activists and musos and artists in the late 90s to the early 2000s, a bit of a heyday. Just a stone's throw away from Wits is a Star in South Street, where Anton worked with some of you here, including Angela. And I used to be based about 7 kilometers from here at the then home of the Sunday Times in Rosebank. But we left in 2006. We were married for just under 3 years at the time, and we decided to take a stab at a different adventure, confident we could do this because our son was still fairly young, and we hoped we would save enough and can start a fun venture, business venture, when we got back. It was going to be a 5-year plan, and London was the key. But the itch for most journalists came up when the Arab uprising started, and in late March 2011, Anton left to cover the war. I had at the time just given birth to our youngest son. I was maternity pay and leave. It made a lot of sense. It was convenient for him to go. In the end, there was one problem with that plan. He never came back. We heard Anton had gone missing. Then we heard he was captured. For 44 days, our family was told he was alive. We were promised those precious proof of life calls. They never materialized. My blissful maternity leave turned into a living hellish nightmare. The cries of our 8-week-old son started to sound like the cries of Anton somewhere. Where? Who knew? What had happened? Our eldest was 7, and he helped me manage the baby. That's all we could both do in between trying to call officials and plead for information and help and aid, anything that we could find out about what was happening to Anton. And in the meantime, watching Libya burning on our screens. We did not have the level of support that a family in a situation such as ours ought to have had. If anything, we were just continuously, cruelly misled. And unsurprisingly, like in so many ongoing situations, it falls to the international journalist community to mobilize, to step in, to breach that gap. They became our lifeline for updates about developments and briefings from government officials and authorities. But as you know, it was to no avail. In the end, despite what officials had promised and told us, we found out Anton had been killed after all. Except the tragic and horrible story doesn't end there. Nobody seemed to have any idea of what had happened to his remains. And all of our attempts as a family stuck in London was just futile. So Anton had dual nationality while he lived in a country that was neither. So he was dual South African and Austrian, but lived in and worked out of London. Our family was caught between the cracks of this situation completely, and there was no help forthcoming for an inquiry into his death and therefore to recover his remains. So despite being a national of two nations, South Africa and Austria, and the fact that he lived and worked in London, his death in a foreign country drew a blank from all the governments that might have assisted. Our status as foreign nationals resident in the UK meant that we couldn't be afforded any support either that British citizens, for example, would ordinarily receive from the government. And as for being South African, well, that was more complex. Any support that would ordinarily be given to families was simply not available to us as South Africans living abroad. In a world that's increasingly global, where all sorts of professionals, including journalists, are more and more internationally mobile, I think you'd agree with me that Anton's case is far from exceptional. There was no help to enable an inquiry into his death and therefore recover his remains, given the complexity of citizenship, where he lived, and his death in a foreign country. And I hear you say, so why should you care? Why does this matter? It matters, friends, because what happened to Anton could actually happen to any of you. Any of you could find yourselves in trouble working abroad and then being sent to cover an assignment even further afield. Your families will have scant access to help. The case of Anton is actually emblematic of what could happen to any journalist working and living abroad. Factually, the various states involved in Anton's case are signatories to global humanitarian rules that place responsibilities on them to hold inquiries in circumstances such as ours. They've signed up to international treaties. Guess what? This means they're actually obligated to investigate when a person has been killed or disappeared. Sadly, we have been let down, and you could find yourselves in the same situation. So it's been 11 years. What have we done in that time? We've lobbied. We've written letters to UK parliamentarians and South African officials to ask for them to intervene. We've addressed the United Nations committees tasked with investigating extrajudicial killings and forced disappearances. We've crowdfunded for our legal costs. We've stood in the English town meters from where we said goodbye to Anton, to raise awareness about our case in our local community. And over the last 12 months, we've stepped things up altogether even more. We took the decision to engage under South African freedom of information laws to understand more about Anton's passports and other documents that would shed light on his last days. This is where another layer of the mystery starts. You see, he traveled to Libya with his passport. It was on him when he was murdered. It was later sent to us by the South African government. No explanation accompanied it. So we have Anton's passport. We still don't know what happened to his body. We still don't have a grave to visit. And we believe that under international law, we have a right to know. So where are we now? Well, we've had to take yet another step more intentionally. We've had to follow through with a court application to demand information from the South African government. And finally, I'm really pleased to say there is a sense of willingness from them to engage. I commend South Africa's new High Commissioner in the UK, His Excellency Jeremiah Mamabolo, because he met with us for the first time last month in London after years of our writing for this request. And we've also been given, just this week, confirmation of a second meeting with Minister Naledi Pandor's legal team and senior officials from the government. That's taking place tomorrow. For now, we're hopeful. All indications are that the South African government is willing to help with cooperation. That, for us, from where we're standing, is incredible. It is regretful that we've had to walk this long road for so long alone, and only recently to receive the focus from the powers that be. Again, I say it just should not have come to that. A family like ours has been let down, and not just by one administration, but multiple, and for more than a decade. But here we are. Indeed, the wheels of justice and truth do turn slowly, and I believe the arc of the universe leans towards justice. I reflect on Baba's case. It took 15 years for the Hydara family to get confirmation that the former President Jammeh actually ordered the 2004 killing of his father, Dedra, in Banjul, Gambia. It's been 11 years since Anton was killed. We have no remains, no investigation, no inquiry. We still want those. As Africans, most of you are aware of the pain of not being able to have a burial. You know that burial means closure. It helps. It doesn't take the pain away, but it helps to know that you've laid your loved one to rest, and we've not had this. But we are encouraged by the South African government in their decision to engage. We are looking forward to the meeting. To finish, I'd just like to call on all of you to take this back home with you. Think about it. It's an important issue. I'd like you to consider how you would go about entrenching in law the obligation and protocols that would enable investigation and recovery of a journalist that is killed abroad. Families like ours and yours cannot be expected to undertake investigations from afar, let alone put up expensive legal battles. And a quick thank you, massive thank you to our legal teams in the UK, Doughty Street Chambers, and here, Webber Wenzel, for actually their invaluable pro bono work. So please, I encourage you, talk, lobby, engage with unions, your civic journalistic organizations, your local government structures. This is an important issue. It's been Anton for the last 11 years, but his fight and our fight is actually your fight too. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Their fight is our fight, it's your fight too, and I think this is exactly what this is all about. The solidarity is key, and I think as a frustration for me often when we are trying to get the message out there about journalists who I like to quote a Cameroonian who once said to a Cameroonian minister who said to me, "You have turned a nobody into a somebody." And we managed to turn a nobody, which was a journalist who'd been detained and no one cared. He wasn't a Jamal Khashoggi, he wasn't Maria Ressa, he was just an ordinary journalist that wasn't even known in his own country. We were able to turn that journalist into a somebody, to quote the minister, and that's where you guys come in. And I think it really is a matter of solidarity that really does assist in putting the plight of families who are trying to get justice, but including those journalists who remain missing. There are people like Azori Gwanda in Tanzania. We're still waiting to hear what's happened to him. In Mozambique, we've got Ibrahim Barouk, also waiting. Is he alive? Is he dead? And then, of course, in Burundi, we have Jean Bigirimana. So I just wanted to add to, you're all journalists. You're the ones that ask questions. So if I could hand over to any of you, anyone who wants to ask our guests a question today, right over there at the top. Yeah, you. We need a few more. The relay.
My name is Rona. I'm a journalist whose father was killed for being a journalist. I actually understand to a bit of an extent, but I want to ask you because I'm still trying to cope. My father was killed 15 years ago by the opposition folks loyal to the opposition party in Nigeria. And we still haven't gotten to where you guys are. We even haven't been able to ask for justice. Because when one person is ready, me, somebody else might not be ready. So how did you guys get to that stage where as a family you were ready? What did you do? Thanks.
Is she asking more about the healing process? Is it more about the healing process you're talking about? The thing is, even in a family, individually, you know how you will be dealing with it through the years. It took us like forever, and until today, it will be 16 December in almost a month or so. And we will be feeling the same like in 2004 when it happened. So things will never be the same, that's for sure. But it's only how you manage it every year. That's what counts. And if you're talking about healing, personally, I don't think that there's a healing, in my opinion. Yeah, because not only about the 16th December, but just hearing some stories about journalists being killed, immediately, you know, all my mood turns, you know, really bad. So what I'm trying to say here is just see how you can manage it, you know, by the day, and, you know, that's the help. That's what sort of brought me to be able to fight for him, actually. If I didn't manage my feelings, then I don't think that I would be here sitting talking about him even. Because I was angry, I wanted to like come to Gambia, but how can you fight a dictator? What you gonna do? You know, and everything, mixed feelings, but just that, try and manage your feelings. Yeah.
Yeah, so just to add to that, firstly, yes, the pain doesn't really go away. You do actually just learn to live with it. It's like they talk about people who've lost a limb. You always feel that ghost limb there. You don't actually feel like it's gone, but it's always there. From a pain point of view, for me, it's been about turning myself inside out and throwing myself at the cross. I'm a Christian and quite unashamed. So that's been the only way for me and my family to get through, and that's myself and my two boys. For the rest of it, I've just had to actually have faith that God will open doors, and through the passage of time, things actually materialized so that we actually are starting to see perhaps some, you know, potential to get the truth. That is the ultimate. To get justice, I'm not sure about whether that's possible. Libya is what it is, and, you know, trying to get that government to actually be open about things and come forward with that, I'm not sure that's going to be the easiest process, but for sure, we just want the truth. We just need to know what everybody's entitled to that. So luckily for us, our family was quite united in realizing that we do need to channel some of that energy into ways and means of finding out. And, you know, we were approached by Doughty Street Chambers in the UK because they saw that there was potential for this case to go further, and there was a real case to answer. So we were very fortunate, and I can see that that is not the same for everyone else. Getting that visibility in front of a very senior team like that is difficult, and I didn't get it easily. It just so happens that I was in journalistic circles, and, you know, people, it was word of mouth that got the attention on the case. So I was very fortunate. But yeah, I would love to talk to you later again. Okay.
I'll second that. If we could talk afterwards, it would be great to just chat a little and also see what we can do for you.
Okay. My name is Marta Kissi. I'm from Côte d'Ivoire. So I want to ask my question in French. Sorry. Alors, eh bien, c'est bon, d'accord. Merci beaucoup. Je me rends compte, quand j'écoute déjà vos histoires, je me rends compte en fait que, en plus du journaliste qui n'est pas en sécurité, sa famille aussi n'est pas en sécurité. Après ces décès, dites-nous, comment est-ce que vous êtes arrivé à vous protéger vous-même? Parce que je me dis, quand un journaliste meurt, déjà, on se dit clairement que sa famille peut-être voudra porter plainte pour élucider l'affaire. Et donc, vous, en tant qu'enfant ou épouse, quels sont les mécanismes que vous avez mis en place pour vous protéger vous-même jusqu'à ce que vous arriviez à peut-être rester en justice et tout?
I'm going to try and translate. She's saying how we manage, since the incident, how we manage to stay alive. And that is keeping everybody in our family safe, knowing that we were dealing with a dictator who was running the country and everything, but how we managed to stay safe as a family. Luckily, when the incident happened, was 16 December. 16 December is my mom's birthday. And my mom was in England, was in London, because with my sister. So there was a plan where we will all meet up in London to celebrate her birthday. And the incident happened 12 o'clock, 16 December. So everybody was already in London, but he was supposed to take the flight the same day of the 16th. So he was the only one with my little brother and half-sister who were in the Gambia at the time. And the three of them were supposed to come to London that same day that the incident happened. So what helped was almost nobody was in the Gambia. I was in Paris, my mom and sister and the other rest of the family were all in London. Afterwards, my brother also came to London, and also my half-sister. So all of us, we left Gambia. And I was always asked about how I feel about Gambia, but for a long time, I didn't feel like a Gambian because I was so angry, out of anger. Je vais essayer de répondre en français. Ce qui nous a aidé, moi et ma famille, c'est que c'était l'anniversaire de ma mère, le 16 décembre. Alors, nous devions tous aller à Londres pour célébrer cet anniversaire. Alors, l'incident s'est passé cette même nuit du 16 décembre, où l'anniversaire de ma mère allait se passer à Londres. Alors, il a été assassiné ce même 16 décembre, où il y avait aussi l'anniversaire du journal Le Point. Le journal Le Point a été créé le même jour que l'anniversaire de ma mère. Alors, ce qui fait que la plupart de la famille était déjà à Londres. Alors, il restait que ma mère, mon demi-frère, mon frère et ma demi-sœur. Alors, après l'incident, tous les trois sont venus nous joindre à Londres. C'est ça qui nous a sauvé la vie, si je puis dire, parce que c'était vraiment difficile pour toute la famille de rester là-bas, sachant que celui qui l'a tué voulait vraiment qu'on ne fasse pas de bruit pour demander justice et pour essayer à pointer du doigt que c'était lui, le dictateur Jammeh, qui a commandé son meurtre. Merci.
Are there any other questions? Guys, I'm going to take about 3 more, and can I just say that after that, I mean, we're going to be at a function. Please, engage, talk to our guests if there are follow-up questions. Over to you.
Okay, good evening. My name is Haruna Mohammed, a Nigerian journalist. I have been threatened several times, and CPJ has issued a statement on my behalf about 2 times. But then we don't feel safe even at that, because the local authorities often tell us that these guys issuing statements on your behalf are not going to protect you when we want to get at you. At the moment, I have to even relocate and move to another state because of the kind of threat I face. So my question is, what is CPJ doing to particularly engage the police in Nigeria and insist that the police have to do something to get journalists protected?
Thanks for that question. So part of the work that we do and the advocacy that we do is definitely having to speak to the authorities. And it doesn't help if you're trying to do this over the telephone. In fact, as we speak, we have people on the ground in Nigeria seeking those sort of meetings. And I'm very concerned ahead of the elections that things are actually going to get a lot worse. But in terms of the advocacy that we do, often we find that the strength in what we do is when all of the organizations work together to ensure that as a united front, we are able to pressurize the various authorities. And that's what we've done, and what I must say has worked in Nigeria. If I just think back to what happened with Joan Zabiri, it was actually at an International Press Institute conference in Abuja, where suddenly we were able to work with the union, the Nigerian Union of Journalists, with IPI and others, to actually ensure that the very man, a journalist who they claimed they didn't know had been detained, that he was finally actually appeared in court after 2 years because of that sort of international pressure that they felt. And so in things like that, I think that's what our strength is, that we can do. And it is working with local organizations. There is nothing worse than having an international NGO trying to dictate to people on what must be said. And that's why we work with local partners. And that's where I think in Nigeria, you do have strong local organizations that we partner with and are able to do the sort of advocacy that you're talking about. But please come chat to me afterwards as well. Thank you.
Hello, Penny, my question to you about Anton. I'm here. Which newspaper or media organization he was working for, and are they taking any responsibility? Because Libya is crazy, and we lost a colleague. He was a freelancer, and it was very hard to hold anyone responsible.
Yeah, absolutely. So that was Anton at the time. He was freelancing. So there was no one specifically that could take responsibility for that. There wasn't anyone we could turn to and say, hey, can you actually help with this? So as far as, any of the, corporate media was concerned, there was none of that, I'm afraid.
There's one more question. Right on top there, I think you need to do a bit of work and rush up the stairs. But if you don't mind, just going to get the mic from him and meet halfway. That'll help. Thank you.
Good evening. Good evening. My name is Seydina Bilal Diallo. I'm a journalist from Senegal. I work also with a Pan-African organization named Africtivists. We fight against shrinking civic space, and we have to promote democracy and rights in Africa. I'm a French speaking, and then I have to ask my question in French. Baba will translate just after. Ma question s'adresse particulièrement à Baba Hydara. On sait que cet événement tragique a eu un impact dans la lutte pour les droits et libertés, et particulièrement la liberté de la presse en Gambie. Depuis Jammeh est parti, Yahya Jammeh est parti, et il y a un nouveau régime. Maintenant, aujourd'hui, comment évaluez-vous la situation des libertés en Gambie en termes de liberté de harcèlement, entre autres? Merci.
Let me translate in English. He's asking, since Yahya Jammeh left, if the freedom of press has changed, the freedom of expression in the Gambia, but something that my dad was fighting, and it was those draconian laws. In my speech, I highlighted one of them, and that was for the registration of a newspaper. To silence the press, Jame made sure that he hiked the price, the fee of registration from 100,000 to 500,000. So those laws, those bills of laws that Jame started are still in our law books. Yeah, sad to say. Sad to say. Ce que je veux dire que ces mêmes lois que mon père se battait contre sont toujours là. Ils ne l'ont pas changé jusqu'à présent. Alors, c'est comme j'ai indiqué avant, si tu voulais seulement enregistrer ton journal, avant tu payais seulement 100 000, mais maintenant ils ont ajouté à ce prix, maintenant tu payes jusqu'à 500 000. Et c'est ces mêmes lois-là, ça c'est un exemple. Mais il y a beaucoup plus d'autres qui sont plus graves, qui font que beaucoup de chefs de presse ne vont pas pouvoir vraiment faire le nécessaire pour que leurs journaux soient représentés. Oui, merci.
Sorry, guys, there's one last question from that side. There's one. Yeah, sorry.
Thank you, Angela. And mine is not a question, actually. It's just as the gentleman from Nigeria and the other mentioned, there's always reference to CPJ and Human Rights Watch and the rest and the work they're doing. My name is Benjamin Tete, and I'm from Ghana. I want to say that increasingly we are seeing threats against journalists. In my home country, I've practiced journalism for quite a bit, about 15 years in Ghana. I've had my recorders seized, or police may have maltreated you or harassed you, but never did you witness the killing of a journalist until about 2 years ago. Ahmed Swale, we heard from Anas yesterday, and Anas had worked with this guy. Blatant in the street, he was shot and killed. And right now, as we speak, no single person has been arrested. The case is still pending. And we've thought that Ghana as a country, as people would have known it, it's changing. Right now, from 30 to over 60 on the global human rights or press freedom index. My petition or my appeal is, as journalists, what are we doing ourselves? We hardly speak up for each other. And this is where my fear is. When it happens to Anton, how many journalists came up to speak to his defense? And we carry the weapon, we carry the arm when it comes to media and communication. And yet we speak the least about ourselves. Other professions are not like that. We may not have the strong professions of the medical, the nurses, the pharmacists, and the rest. But at least we can use our platform to speak for each other. I think if we will make more of this noise, and if we will make it a campaign, I've seen elsewhere where, like in Germany, a newspaper front page will be blank as a way of making a statement. I think it's about time that we would carry the burden on our own shoulders. Yes, we'll have others supporting, but if we speak up for ourselves, it will be a first point to rally support. I believe that will be the only way. Otherwise, I'm afraid we'll suffer our end in Ghana, you'll suffer yours in Nigeria, and then that trend is continuing. And others are being encouraged to rise up and be blatant in their attack, and the impunity continues. So it's for us all. Thank you.
Yeah. Just let me answer to that. Contrary to my dad's murder, most of his colleagues did a lot of things every year to celebrate to the anniversary of his death. Not only in the Gambia, but even Senegal, like the organization that Bilal represents, Africtivists, they used to organize every year, 16 December, a big protest in one of the biggest streets in Dhaka. And we did the first protest in the Gambia, but after the government brought the army for the first time, and they were blocking everyone and arresting whoever turned up for the protest. So what we did is, with the help of Fatou Jagne, Article 19, Africtivists, Aisha Dabo and all, they started organizing, and it was a big event, seminars, journalists around the sub-region and everything. So that was a solidarity that I commend, and that is what you're talking about. Maybe what we need more is to collaborate between us so that this kind of things can happen. Because if you don't know about somebody's issue from another country, you will never be able to help. So if we collaborate more, maybe that can help more. When you're in trouble, the other one will come to your rescue. I thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much for that. I think you've given my conclusion, so I'm able to cut this in the sense that I think, judging for what he's just said, this is why the declaration that I'm about to read is so important, because I'm going to put it to the floor, and then by acclamation. Is this? Okay, well, as all of that is happening, let me read the declaration, and as I said, I'm going to put it to the floor, and then by acclamation, just hands up if you guys agree. Oh, why am I giving this? I'm reading it. Won't you hang on to that? Thanks so much. All right, so this is the declaration. Impunity prevails in far too many cases where journalists are attacked for their work. When no one is held accountable for violence against the press, it sends a chilling message to others that may seek to bluntly censor reporting and deny the public access to information. The killings of journalists like Anton Hamel, shot by Libyan government forces in 2011, and Dada Hydara, shot by members of then-President Yahya Jammeh's hit squad as he drove home from the office in the Gambia in 2004, underscores the dangers faced by reporters across Africa. Somali journalists are killed in the line of duty with tragic regularity. And in Ghana, the killers of investigative journalist Ahmed Swaleh remain at large 4 years after his murder. Africa's media have come to know impunity as the norm, not the exception. Recent research by the Committee to Protect Journalists indicates that in over 80% of journalist murders, no one has been held to account. This is an alarming statistic. Authorities should make it a top priority to act and commit the political will necessary to combat impunity, not only for killings, but other attacks as well. Too often, governments claim to stand for press freedom, yet their allocation of resources to investigations of attacks on the media remains lacking. Empty words will not fill the open wounds of a journalist beaten on the job, or the empty seat at the kitchen table of a reporter gunned down in reprisal for their investigations. Attacks on the press are never justified, but when they happen, there must be justice. So let me put this to the floor for acclamation. Thank you. Do you want to do the thank you?
Thank you very much for those strong words, for those extraordinary accounts of personal experiences, and for those who added to them. I think some very important and very powerful things were said, and I'm sure, like me, you're all affected by the strength of what is said, and will take away from this the desire for us to work together against this notion of impunity. A big thanks to our speakers for their role in this. Both have traveled a long way to come tell us the story, and we greatly appreciate it. Give them a clap. A big thanks to Angela. What I didn't tell you is that she stepped in at the last minute because Paula Frey fell ill. Thank you for doing that, and thank you for your role. And thank you, and convey to your colleagues at CPJ our gratitude for the work the organization does in this area. Thank you to you all. I have a couple of quick announcements. And sorry, I've thanked the CPJ, and I've thanked my own organization, the CFE, as partners, and for the Wits Center of Journalism for helping host us this evening. One small announcement before we go for dinner, and that is those of you who are flying out tomorrow afternoon and who need to travel straight from here should please bring your luggage in the morning. It will be safeguarded in the registration tent. It will enable you to leave directly to the airport if you need to. So if your flight is before 5 o'clock, for example, please do that so that things don't run into difficulty. Thank you very much. Across on the marquee, there is dinner. There will be short speeches. There will be wonderful food. And then there is great music for us to have a bit of a party. Thank you very much. Sorry about the ticket. I could have killed it.
I could have.
I'm sorry.
I said that I was here.
Sorry?
I said that I was here.
I'm sorry.
No, it was a pity because it was like lots of lovely images.
Yeah.
But,
I thought Aurelia was looking after it and should have all been should have been much more carefully pre-organized. Hello. Sorry?
I'm Abdul from Nigeria.